1941. The Atlantic Ocean is a graveyard. 3,000 Allied ships rest on the seafloor because the Nazis possess something the world's greatest minds call mathematically impossible to break. But in a secret British mansion, a strange mathematician who chains his tea mug to radiators is about to prove that sometimes the only way to beat a machine is to build a better one. The numbers told a story of apocalypse. Every 24 hours, somewhere in the cold waters of the Atlantic, another Allied convoy vanished beneath the waves. Torpedoes from German U-boats found their targets with terrifying precision, as if the enemy could read minds, predict routes, coordinate attacks like a pack of mechanical wolves hunting in perfect synchronization. British merchant ships loaded with food, fuel, and ammunition never reached their destinations. Sailors died by the thousands. The island nation of Britain, isolated and besieged, was slowly starving. Winston Churchill would later write that the U-boat threat was the only thing that truly frightened him during the entire war. And he had good reason. The Germans possessed an advantage that seemed insurmountable, a technological marvel that rendered Allied naval strategy nearly obsolete. Every German military communication, from submarine coordinates to troop movements, tank deployments to air raid plans, was encrypted through a device called Enigma. And Enigma was considered unbreakable. Imagine a machine the size of a typewriter with 3 rotating wheels called rotors. Each rotor contained 26 letters of the alphabet arranged in scrambled order. When you pressed a key, electrical current passed through all 3 rotors, then reflected back through a plug board that swapped additional letters, illuminating a different letter on a lamp board. The genius of Enigma lay in its astronomical complexity. 3 rotors, each with 26 positions, combined with a plug board creating billions of additional variations, produced 158 quintillion possible combinations. That's 158 million potential codes. And every night at midnight, German radio operators changed the daily settings, resetting the entire system. Even if you somehow cracked yesterday's code, today's messages remained completely indecipherable. German high command believed Enigma made their communications absolutely secure. Mathematicians calculated that decrypting a single Enigma message by hand would require testing combinations for longer than the age of the universe. The machine was, by every rational calculation, perfect, unbreakable, invincible. But in September 1939, as Hitler's armies rolled across Poland and Britain declared war, a peculiar 27-year-old mathematician received a discreet summons. Alan Turing was asked to report to a Victorian mansion 50 miles north of London, a place called Bletchley Park, where Britain's government code and cipher school was establishing its wartime headquarters. What happened next would change the course of human history. Alan Matheson Turing was born on June 23, 1912, in London to a middle-class family. His father worked for the Indian Civil Service, which meant young Alan spent much of his childhood separated from his parents, raised by foster families and boarding schools. He was an odd child, the type other students found difficult to understand. He stammered when nervous. He chewed his nails until they bled. He ran everywhere instead of walking because running felt more efficient. When he attended Sherborne School, he once rode his bicycle 60 miles to get there because a railway strike disrupted normal transportation. This wasn't determination in the conventional sense. It was Turing simply seeing a problem, calculating the solution, and executing it without considering whether anyone else thought it strange. At King's College, Cambridge, Turing's mathematical brilliance became undeniable. While his peers struggled with complex theorems, Turing seemed to exist on a different intellectual plane. He saw patterns others missed, found elegant solutions to problems others considered impossible. In 1936, at just 24 years old, he published a paper titled On Computable Numbers that would become one of the most important works in the history of mathematics and computer science. In this paper, Turing described a theoretical device, an imaginary machine that could perform any mathematical computation if given the right instructions. This universal Turing machine existed only in abstract theory, but it laid the groundwork for what we now call computers. Turing imagined machines that could think before anyone else believed such a thing was possible. But Turing's brilliance came wrapped in profound social awkwardness. He couldn't make small talk. He took everything literally. During lectures, he'd become so absorbed in a mathematical problem that he'd forget his audience entirely, scribbling equations on blackboards while muttering to himself. Colleagues found him brilliant, but exhausting. He chained his tea mug to the radiator in his office because he suspected someone was stealing it, apparently not considering that this behavior might seem eccentric. He wore his gas mask while riding his bicycle during hay fever season, oblivious to the stares of passers-by. He was the human embodiment of the absent-minded professor stereotype, except his mind wasn't absent at all. It was simply operating on wavelengths most people couldn't detect. When war came, Britain needed people who thought differently. The traditional codebreakers at Bletchley Park were linguists, scholars of ancient languages, crossword puzzle enthusiasts who approached cryptography as a literary art. They examined messages for patterns, analyzed letter frequencies, applied techniques that had worked during the First World War. These methods had merit, but they were hopelessly inadequate against Enigma's mathematical complexity. The old guard was trying to solve a mathematical problem with linguistic tools. They were bringing knives to a tank fight. Turing saw immediately what others missed. Enigma wasn't a code in the traditional sense. It was a mathematical transformation system, a mechanical brain that converted one string of letters into another, according to precisely defined rules. You couldn't beat it through intuition or educated guessing. The numbers were too big, the combinations too vast. Manual decryption was impossible. But machines, Turing realized, could do something humans couldn't. Machines could test thousands of combinations per minute without fatigue, without mistakes, without needing sleep or food or encouragement. The solution wasn't to crack Enigma through human intelligence. The solution was to build a machine that could think faster than Enigma could scramble. This was a revolutionary concept. In 1940, computers as we know them didn't exist. The idea that you could build a mechanical device to perform logical operations at high speed seemed like science fiction. When Turing proposed constructing an electromechanical computer to attack Enigma, many of his colleagues thought he'd lost his mind. The military establishment doubted whether such a machine was even theoretically possible, let alone practical. And even if you could build it, would it work? Would it be fast enough? Could you complete it before Britain lost the war? Turing had one advantage. Polish cryptanalysts, before their country fell to the Nazi invasion, had made remarkable progress against an earlier, simpler version of Enigma. They'd developed a machine called the Bomba that could test rotor settings mechanically. When Poland was overrun, Polish codebreakers escaped to France and shared their work with British intelligence. Turing studied the Polish designs carefully, then took them to an entirely different level. He reimagined the entire approach, incorporating advanced logical concepts from his theoretical work on computing machines. His design would be faster, more sophisticated, more powerful than anything previously attempted. The device Turing designed became known as the bomb, a 7-foot-tall cabinet filled with rotating drums and electrical circuits. The name came from the ticking sound it made during operation, like a mechanical time bomb counting down. 108 drums rotated simultaneously, each drum representing the possible positions of Enigma's rotors. The bomb used a technique called logical contradiction. If you assumed a particular Enigma setting and it led to an impossible result, you could eliminate that entire branch of possibilities. The machine would test thousands of rotor combinations per minute, systematically eliminating impossibilities until only the correct daily setting remained. Building the first bomb was an engineering nightmare. No blueprints existed. No one had attempted anything like this before. Turing and a small team of engineers worked around the clock at Bletchley Park, improvising solutions, redesigning components when they failed, testing and retesting every circuit and connection. Resources were scarce. Britain was fighting for survival, and many military leaders viewed Turing's project as a waste of valuable materials and manpower. Meanwhile, every day ships sank. Every day soldiers died. The pressure was suffocating. Turing wasn't working alone. Bletchley Park became home to some of Britain's most unconventional minds. Joan Clark, a brilliant mathematician from Cambridge, became one of Turing's closest collaborators and friends. In a male-dominated environment, Clark's contributions were extraordinary, though she was paid less than male colleagues despite equal or superior ability. Gordon Welchman, another mathematician, developed improvements to Turing's design that dramatically increased the bomb's efficiency. Hugh Alexander, a British chess champion, joined the team and brought game theory thinking to code-breaking strategy. Together, this strange collection of academics, mathematicians, and puzzle enthusiasts formed the intellectual heart of Britain's cryptographic warfare. By March 1940, the first bomb became operational. It was named Victory. The machine hummed and ticked and clattered, processing combinations at speeds impossible for human calculation. And then, after hours of mechanical thinking, it stopped. The drums locked into position. A possible Enigma setting emerged. Cryptanalysts tested the setting against intercepted German messages, and words appeared. German words, readable text, operational orders, naval coordinates. The code was broken. But breaking Enigma created a profound moral dilemma. If Britain suddenly changed tactics based on decoded German intelligence, the Nazis would realize their communications were compromised. They'd modify Enigma, change protocols, add additional rotors. The entire advantage would disappear. So British intelligence had to use the intelligence carefully, selectively, in ways that appeared coincidental. Sometimes this meant allowing attacks to succeed when they could have been prevented. It meant watching ships sail into danger when warnings might have saved them, because sending warnings would reveal the source of the intelligence. The question of whether British leadership knew about the bombing of Coventry in November 1940 remains controversial. Did decoded Enigma messages reveal German plans to devastate the city? Did Churchill allow the attack to proceed to protect the secret? Historians debate this endlessly. What's certain is that the stakes of maintaining secrecy were monumentally high, and the decisions made were incomprehensibly difficult. As the war progressed, German confidence in Enigma actually increased. They never suspected their unbreakable machine had been defeated. In February 1942, the German Navy introduced a 4-rotor Enigma for submarine communications, exponentially increasing the number of possible combinations. For nearly 10 months, Bletchley Park was blind again. U-boat attacks intensified. Allied shipping losses soared. Turing and his team worked frantically to crack the new system, developing more sophisticated techniques, building additional bombs, pushing the technology to its absolute limits. In December 1942, they broke 4-rotor Enigma. Almost immediately, the Battle of the Atlantic shifted. British naval intelligence could predict U-boat positions with remarkable accuracy. Convoys could be rerouted. Hunter-killer groups could be dispatched to submarine coordinates. Suddenly, being a U-boat sailor became one of the most dangerous jobs in the German military. The hunters became the hunted. Over 75% of German submarine crews died during the war. By 1944, as Allied forces prepared for D-Day, Bletchley Park was processing thousands of Enigma messages daily. The intelligence flowing from Turing's machines gave Allied commanders an extraordinary advantage. They could read German troop dispositions, supply status, defensive preparations. They knew Hitler believed the invasion would come at Calais, not Normandy. Decoded messages confirmed that Allied deception operations were working perfectly. When Allied forces landed on the Normandy beaches on June 6, 1944, they did so with knowledge of German defenses that would have seemed miraculous to commanders in any previous war. The scale of Bletchley Park's operation by war's end was staggering. Over 10,000 people worked there, operating more than 200 bombs running continuously, analyzing 84,000 intercepted messages per month. And almost no one outside Bletchley Park knew any of this existed. The work was classified at the highest possible level. Families of Bletchley Park staff had no idea what their loved ones were doing. Veterans of the code-breaking effort were forbidden from discussing their work. The Official Secrets Act bound them to silence. When the war ended in May 1945, Alan Turing couldn't tell anyone what he'd accomplished. He couldn't explain that he'd possibly saved millions of lives. Couldn't describe how his machine revolutionized warfare. Couldn't share that he'd helped shorten the most devastating conflict in human history. He was ordered to remain silent, and he obeyed. Historians now estimate that breaking Enigma shortened the war in Europe by 2 to 4 years. Some calculate the number of lives saved at 14 million or more. These are staggering numbers, almost impossible to comprehend. Entire cities that would have been destroyed remained intact. Millions of soldiers and civilians who would have died survived to build families, create businesses, write books, compose music, live full lives. The ripple effects of Turing's work extended across generations. After the war, Turing continued his theoretical work. In 1950, he published Computing Machinery and Intelligence, a paper that asked a deceptively simple question: that can machines think? He proposed what became known as the Turing test, a method for determining whether a machine exhibits intelligent behavior indistinguishable from a human. This paper laid philosophical groundwork for the entire field of artificial intelligence. Again, Turing was decades ahead of his time, imagining futures others couldn't conceive. But post-war Britain was not kind to Alan Turing. In January 1952, his house was burgled. During the police investigation, Turing acknowledged a sexual relationship with another man. Homosexuality was illegal in Britain, despite his extraordinary service to his country, despite saving countless lives, despite being one of the greatest intellects of the 20th century. Alan Turing was prosecuted for gross indecency. He was given a choice between imprisonment and chemical castration through hormone treatments. He chose the treatments. The man who'd built a thinking machine was subjected to drugs that altered his body and mind, punishment for the crime of being himself. His security clearance was revoked. He was barred from continuing his cryptographic work. Colleagues avoided him. His career was destroyed. On June 7, 1954, Alan Turing was found dead in his home. Near his body was an apple, partially eaten, apparently laced with cyanide. The official verdict was suicide. Turing was 41 years old. Some dispute the suicide verdict, suggesting the death might have been accidental, the result of an amateur chemistry experiment gone wrong. Turing did conduct chemical experiments in his home, and cyanide was among his laboratory materials. But the symbolism of the poisoned apple, reminiscent of Snow White and the circumstances, seemed to many conclusive evidence of intentional self-destruction. The tragedy is almost unbearable. A man who changed the world, who saved millions, who pioneered technologies that define modern civilization, was prosecuted by the very country he'd saved, then died in disgrace and isolation. For decades, his contributions remained classified. The public had no idea what he'd accomplished. When computer science began to emerge as a field in the 1960s and 70s, Turing's theoretical work was recognized, but the full scope of his wartime achievements remained secret until the mid-1970s, when the British government finally declassified information about Bletchley Park and Enigma. Slowly, painfully slowly, recognition came. Computer scientists understood that Turing's theoretical work was foundational. The concept of the universal Turing machine underlies every computer ever built. The Turing test remains the standard philosophical framework for discussing machine intelligence. In computer science, the Turing Award, established in 1966, is considered equivalent to the Nobel Prize. It's named in honor of a man whose own country treated him as a criminal. In 2009, British Prime Minister Gordon Brown issued an official apology on behalf of the British government, acknowledging the appalling treatment Turing received. Brown called the prosecution unjust and discriminatory, recognizing Turing's extraordinary contributions. In 2013, Queen Elizabeth II granted Turing a posthumous royal pardon. In 2021, the Bank of England unveiled a new £50 note featuring Alan Turing's face, finally giving him a place of honor in British national identity. But these gestures, while meaningful, came far too late for the man himself. Alan Turing died thinking he was disgraced, never knowing he would eventually be recognized as one of the most important figures of the 20th century. His legacy is everywhere. Every time you use a computer, you're using technology based on principles Turing articulated. Every encrypted message on the internet relies on mathematical concepts related to the code-breaking techniques he pioneered. Every discussion about artificial intelligence references frameworks he established. The digital age exists because a socially awkward mathematician who chained his tea mug to radiators saw possibilities others couldn't imagine. There's a parallel between Alan Turing and Kelly Johnson, the legendary aircraft designer who built planes that outran missiles. Both were brilliant, difficult, uncompromising geniuses. Both challenged established thinking and created revolutionary technologies. Both fought bureaucracy and skepticism. Both proved that the impossible is only impossible until someone refuses to accept that limitation. Kelly Johnson built machines that defied physics. Alan Turing built a machine that could think. The difference is that Johnson received recognition during his lifetime, while Turing died in obscurity and shame. But both men shared an essential quality that they saw the future before it existed and had the courage and brilliance to build it. The Enigma story teaches us something profound about innovation. The old guard at Bletchley Park, the traditional cryptographers, weren't stupid. They were experts, accomplished professionals using established techniques. But they were trying to solve a new problem with old tools. Turing succeeded because he refused to accept conventional wisdom. When everyone said manual decryption was impossible, he agreed and built a machine. When everyone said such a machine couldn't be constructed, he built it anyway. When everyone said it wouldn't be fast enough, he made it faster. This is the pattern of transformative innovation. It doesn't come from doing what's expected slightly better. It comes from people who think so differently that their solutions seem crazy until they work. Turing didn't incrementally improve existing code-breaking methods. He invented an entirely new category of technology, and he did it under almost impossible pressure. While designing the bomb, while solving theoretical problems no one had faced before, people were dying. Ships were sinking. His country was losing the war. The weight of that responsibility would have crushed most people. Turing carried it and kept working. There's something heartbreaking about Turing's personality. The same qualities that made him brilliant, his literal-mindedness, his inability to perform social niceties, his focus on logic over emotion, made him vulnerable in a society that punished difference. He couldn't pretend to be someone else. He couldn't hide who he was. And ultimately, that honesty destroyed him. But it's precisely that uncompromising authenticity that enabled his breakthroughs. Turing saw problems clearly because he saw everything clearly, unclouded by social convention or political considerations. He asked questions others didn't ask because he genuinely didn't understand why those questions were supposed to be forbidden. His outsider status, the thing that made him suffer, was also the source of his genius. Today, we live in a world Turing helped create. Artificial intelligence researchers still debate the questions he raised in 1950. Cryptographers still use mathematical principles he pioneered. Computer scientists still study his theoretical papers. And every June, on the anniversary of his death, LGBTQ advocates remember him as a tragic example of injustice and persecution. The machines at Bletchley Park are gone now. The bombs were destroyed after the war, broken into pieces and scattered to maintain secrecy. Only a few components survived. The mansion at Bletchley Park is now a museum, preserving the memory of what happened there. Visitors can see reconstructed bombs, hear the mechanical ticking sound they made, imagine the desperate urgency of wartime code breaking. But Turing's real legacy isn't in museums, it's in your pocket. The smartphone you carry, exponentially more powerful than the room-sized computers of the 1960s, is a direct descendant of the theoretical universal Turing machine. The encrypted messages protecting your financial transactions use mathematics evolved from wartime cryptography. The AI assistants answering your questions are attempting to pass tests Turing described 70 years ago. Every technological revolution requires someone to see what doesn't yet exist and believe it's possible. The Wright brothers saw flying machines when everyone else saw fantasy. Thomas Edison saw electric light when everyone else saw gaslight. Steve Jobs saw personal computers when everyone else saw mainframes. Alan Turing saw thinking machines when everyone else saw mechanical calculators. And he saw them not as distant future possibilities, but as immediate necessities. When Britain faced existential threat, when millions of lives hung in the balance, Turing didn't wait for someone else to invent the solution. He invented it himself. That's the final lesson of Alan Turing's story. Genius isn't just about being smarter than everyone else. It's about seeing problems clearly, imagining solutions boldly, and having the courage to build something that's never existed before, even when everyone tells you it's impossible. The Nazis thought Enigma made them invincible. They were wrong, because they didn't account for a stammering, eccentric British mathematician who refused to accept that any code was truly unbreakable. They built a perfect machine. He built a better one. And in doing so, Alan Turing didn't just help win a war. He created the foundation for the digital revolution that would transform human civilization. Every innovation in computing, every advance in artificial intelligence, every breakthrough in cryptography stands on groundwork he laid, often alone, usually unrecognized, always brilliant. In the end, history remembers. It took far too long, cost far too much, and came far too late for the man himself. But now, finally, we understand what Alan Turing gave us. He gave us victory when defeat seemed inevitable. He gave us decades of peace that would have been years of continued slaughter. He gave us technologies that define modern life. And he gave us an example of what one extraordinary mind, thinking differently than everyone else, can accomplish when facing the impossible. The strange mathematician, who chained his tea mug to radiators, saved the world. Then, the world broke his heart. But his ideas, his innovations, his legacy, the thinking machines he imagined are immortal. And every time you ask your phone a question, every time you send an encrypted message, every time you use a computer, you're using technology that exists because Alan Turing refused to believe that impossible meant impossible. He proved that sometimes the only way to beat a perfect machine is to build a mind that can think faster, deeper, and more brilliantly than anyone imagined possible. And that mind was his.